Hi there YouTube, it's Ellen of Borg again. This time I want to do a little video about quantum physics and the existence of God. Now, for those of you who aren't really familiar with quantum physics, I'll give you a little bit of an overview. There's quite a lot of videos on the internet about the double-slit experiment. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the double-slit experiment, I'll very briefly explain. Basically, electrons are generally thought of as little teeny particles of matter. Now, in the double-slit experiment, what was done is that they fired individual electrons at a screen containing two slits. Now, logic would say that if it's a particle and a physical object, it will either go through one slit or the other slit, or just hit the barrier and go through neither. However, that's not what was observed. When the experiment was run, they actually discovered that each individual electron was able to travel through both slits simultaneously to interfere with itself and create an interference pattern on the detector screen at the back. Now, that is basically the electrons behaving as waves. That's definitely not what you would expect to see. The same experiment has been done with numerous different things, including photons, which are particles of light, and what you will always find is exactly the same results. Now, basically what this means is that there's nothing in the universe which is actually solid. What we think of as matter is nothing more than stabilized waves. So atoms aren't what we think they are. So, say for instance I pick up my phone, made of atoms, looks pretty solid, right? I can hold it in my hand. It's hard to touch. It's solid. Except that that is just an illusion. This phone is not a solid object. This computer I'm using, again, it's not a solid object. And neither are you, me, animals, plants, planets, stars. Nothing that you can see or physically interact with, not a single thing in the universe is solid. Quantum physics also throws up some other very bizarre things as well. And in the case of electrons, it was actually discovered that as long as they were not being observed, they would behave as waves. However, when they tried to pinpoint where an individual electron was at any point in time, they could actually observe the particle, and it would go through either one slit or the other. In other words, the very act of observation itself will cause the wave function to collapse, and when that happens, it will once again behave as the solid particle. They call it collapsing the wave function. Now, that has some serious implications. It means that anything that is not being looked at or observed consciously doesn't actually exist as anything other than waves. That's a strange thought in itself. I mean, even Einstein said, I'd rather think that the moon is still there even if I'm not looking at it. It's just something that's just there. You know, it's another bizarre thing. And on another level, there's also been some other experiments that have been done concerning splitting a particle in half and sending them in the opposite directions, and then when they do something to one of them, the exact same thing happens to the other one simultaneously, as though the two particles, despite any distance between them, they are going to be affected instantaneously. So if one's affected, they're both affected at exactly the same time. There's no delay between one and the other, as you would normally expect. We usually would think of the speed of light as being the speed limit for the universe, but in quantum physics that seems to not apply, which does bring up some extremely interesting implications. Now, as everybody knows, the universe started with a Big Bang. That's been proven now beyond any form of reasonable doubt. So the universe was like, they reckon, about the size of a pea, and then it began expanding from there. Now, in that incredibly dense state, everything was in contact with everything else. Now, if anything that was together is quantumly entangled when it becomes separated, that means that quantum entanglement is actually happening on a huge scale, the scale of the entire universe. And that's pretty interesting in and of itself. Now, what all of this says is matter's not real, it's all an illusion. Now, there have been a lot of people who've actually called it the holographic universe, because also what's on one scale is reflected in what's on another scale. For instance, the atom is kind of like a miniature solar system, isn't it? And the same sort of thing on a galactic scale. You've got all the stars, they're orbiting around the supermassive black hole. So that's like on the larger scale. So when you have a look at it like that, that's where the term as above, so below. Now, what all of this means, if the universe itself is a gigantic hologram, as has been more or less proven at this point, what that means in some very real term is that if there's a hologram, there must be a projector of some kind. Since nothing is physical, nothing is real in that sense, the laws of physics as we know them must have had an inventor. The energy for the creation of the universe has to have come from somewhere. I mean, you can't get energy from nowhere. The laws of physics actually state that energy cannot be created and nor can it be destroyed. Fundamental law of physics, that. And, you know, if people are not familiar with that, then for God's sake, Google it, because it's important basic information. Now, the way that I've interpreted this whole thing is that the universe must actually be a thought in the mind of God. Now, I say that for a couple of very simple reasons. Firstly, as we know, as I've already said, there's no such thing as something that's physical, it just appears that way. And secondly, it also ties in with the idea that all of the laws that govern the universe have to come from somewhere. And as you know, the laws of physics, they work exactly the same regardless of where in the universe you happen to be. For instance, gravity exists everywhere. And the electromagnetic forces they exist everywhere too. So when you take that into consideration, all of that must mean that the same entity created the lot. I mean, there's plenty of other ways that the universe could have panned out had the law of physics been completely different. Say, for instance, if the speed of light was much slower or faster, or if the force of gravity had been significantly stronger. Well, if that had been the case, the universe probably wouldn't even still be here. It would have collapsed in on itself already. So the more you actually look at it, the more interesting this becomes. Now, the next question would be, logically speaking, okay, we know that a supreme being created the universe. The next question would logically be, well, why? Well, you think about it. Why would God bother to create this lovely universe we happen to live in? I reckon it boils down to one thing and one thing only. Since we're all existing inside of God's mind, that means that every single thing in existence is actually a part of God. And basically everything that's conscious, whether that be animals, people, extraterrestrials, it's a way for God to see things in a completely different way from the perspective of a limited being. Because if you know absolutely everything, now wouldn't the world be boring? Knowing past, present, future, everything. So the whole idea of having billions upon billions of organisms through which to experience this reality would most likely relieve the boredom. And it'd give the experience of learning, because if you think about it, a supreme being that knows everything cannot learn. Whereas a limited being, like you or I, we can learn. There's a hell of a lot more we don't know than what we do. That much is for certain. And furthermore, it seems that our universe is not the only one out there. In fact, as I've mentioned in a previous video, the one about the Mandela effect, reality has been somewhat tampered with by people hacking into other universes using quantum computers. So we now know that we ain't the only universe, and the fact that we can tap into them means that those universes must also be created by the same mind. So basically, there's several universes that all exist within God, which is very interesting in and of itself. Now, what this means for organised religion, well, you've only got to take a look at it. I mean, the organised religion's putting people basically into a set of mind prisons. You must believe this or you're going to hell. Don't work that way. The whole point of us even being here is to just learn what we can and to experience what we can, you know. Nobody is going to be condemned or going to hell simply because they've used the brain that we've been given for the purpose of learning for actually learning. What kind of bullshit's that? Think about it. If you're a supreme being and you created lots and lots and lots of different universes with lots and lots and lots of different beings, you're not going to suddenly want them putting themselves in little mind boxes where they don't learn anything. It kind of defeat the object, wouldn't it? So, yeah, organised religion as we currently understand it has got to go. There's no question about that in my mind. Does that mean as we have to toss out the entire Bible? Of course not. What it does mean is that we must look at these things with a critical eye, the same as we would do for anything else. Which brings me on to a slightly other subject. You don't just believe what you're told about anything. You know, media lies. All the time, habitually. And to a certain extent, so does the education system. I mean, we weren't really taught anything about quantum physics in high school, were we? Wonder why that might be. Yeah, it's about time people started thinking for themselves and not blindly accepting everything what they're told. You know, that's the road to being mind controlled. And I'm going to be doing another video at some point about the nature of these mind prisons and why they defeated our very purpose. So that being said, I think with this video I've pretty much given me reasons why I'm saying that God definitely exists, and of course the purposes of us and the other extraterrestrial beings which are out there as well. So by all means drop a comment, your thoughts on the subject, and I'll make another video soon. Bye for now.